When I married Andrew, he was working for my father, which is how we first crossed paths. We agreed that after our wedding, I would focus on my hobbies, particularly sewing and knitting. I loved crafting scarves and gloves for him each winter, gradually improving my skills until he began to proudly compare my creations to store-bought ones. His encouragement ignited my passion, and I dreamed of sharing this hobby with our future child, a thought that always brought a smile to both our faces. Now, 6 years into our marriage, we may not have children, but we've found happiness in our life together. Despite the demands of his job, Andrew makes it a point to carve out time for us on his days off, which means everything to me. Still, there are times when his work leaves me feeling a bit isolated. 3 years ago, our peaceful life took a turn when I suddenly collapsed at home from dizziness. Andrew rushed me to the hospital, and when I regained consciousness, I overheard him discussing my condition with the doctor. It was serious and something I would need to manage for the rest of my life. While it wasn't immediately life-threatening, the potential for future episodes meant longer hospital stays were likely. Even amid my anxiety, Andrew remained my rock, offering reassurance. During one of those hospital stays, I found myself reflecting on the many scarves and gloves I had knitted, now carelessly discarded. It was then that Andrew, perhaps without thinking, remarked, "I married you because you're the boss's daughter." His words struck me hard, awakening a realization. I knew I needed to confront him about his true feelings and discuss how we could nurture our time together, just as we had envisioned in the early days of our marriage. Despite his reassurances, Andrew's comforting words only somewhat eased my worries. He held my hand, urging me not to fret and promising to visit whenever he could steal away from work. With him by my side, I felt a flicker of hope that things might turn out all right, even without guarantees. True to his word, he initially visited almost every day. He would check on me, hold my hand, and bring my favorite sewing tools to help pass the time. Teaching him to sew became a joyful distraction, making the monotony of hospital life more bearable as we chatted about daily trivialities and stitched together, savoring each other's company. However, after about a year, Andrew's visits dwindled from daily check-ins to just a few every weeks. I assumed he was overwhelmed with work and continued my sewing, focusing on a scarf I planned to present to him during his next visit, anticipating my discharge by the year's end. I also started knitting gloves to accompany the scarf, pouring all my affection and longing into each stitch. When he finally showed up again, I eagerly handed him the gloves, only to be met with a cold glare. "Are you still making these? It's annoying," he said bluntly, pushing the pristine scarf I had crafted back into my hands along with divorce papers. His words cut deeper than any physical pain I had endured. Andrew explained that he couldn't continue caring for me, suggesting it was time for us to part ways. The divorce papers were already signed, signaling the end of our journey together, although I had sensed a shift in our relationship since his visits became less frequent. Facing this reality was devastating. I had always told myself he was simply caught up with work, but the Andrew I knew, the kind and attentive one, would never have let that stop him from supporting me. When he stopped visiting without explanation, I knew something was wrong. Calmly, I asked him why he wanted a divorce, not because I was desperately clinging to our relationship, but because I realized I might have become a burden to him. If the compassionate Andrew I married truly wanted this, I was prepared to let go. Accepting this was painful but necessary. It was clear the life we once dreamed of sharing was no longer possible. As Andrew's visits became increasingly rare, I grappled with the realization that the partnership he once promised seemed like a distant memory. Finally, summoning the courage to confront him about his drastic change, his response shocked me. "Isn't it obvious? Ever since I married you, it's been one problem after another. I'm so tired of those scarves and gloves you make every year. Honestly, I only married you because your dad was my boss," he confessed with a harsh laugh that felt like a slap. His words exposed a deep-seated resentment towards the simple joys I cherished in our life together, joys that he now dismissed as trivial and embarrassing. As Andrew vented his frustrations, I noticed the luxurious scarf wrapped around his neck, a scarf I hadn't made. It dawned on me that he had never truly appreciated any of the gifts I had lovingly crafted. Perhaps they had always been nothing more than an annoyance to him, a realization that stung painfully. After I fell ill and my father retired, it became clear that Andrew no longer felt the need to maintain the facade of a caring husband at work. During the first year of my illness, he had diligently visited, possibly to uphold his image, where he was often lauded for his dedication to his sick wife. This facade seemed to enhance his reputation among colleagues. When I confronted him about this, pointing out how his visits seemed motivated more by a desire to maintain his image than by genuine concern, Andrew was taken aback. He sheepishly admitted that my condition had indeed made things easier for him at work. This candid acknowledgement confirmed my suspicions, deepening the chasm that had formed between us. My worth had become tied not to our shared life or the love I believed we had, but to how my situation could serve his interests. This harsh realization was a turning point, illuminating the vast chasm between the life we had promised each other and the one we were living. Throughout my illness, Andrew had seemingly exploited the sympathy and goodwill of others. He candidly admitted that mentioning my condition at work earned him extra praise for his supposed dedication and granted him breaks whenever he needed them. If I worked late, everyone praised me for being so dedicated, and if I needed a break, all I had to say was, "My wife is sick," he explained, his tone devoid of remorse. He spoke almost boastfully, adding that my illness had unwittingly paved the way for his upcoming promotion, dismissing his colleagues as fools easily manipulated by his story. As he spoke, the man I had once loved faded away, replaced by a stranger with a cruel smile, revealing his true nature. Resigned and aware of the extent of his deceit, I quietly accepted the reality of our situation. "Well, if my illness was useful to you, then I guess we probably won't see each other again. So take care," I replied calmly, handing him the divorce papers. He barely glanced at them before taking them and leaving quickly, marking the end of our marriage. Once he was gone, the weight of it all crashed down on me, and I cried alone. Soon after, I was discharged from the hospital and returned to my parents' home. My father was furious when he learned how Andrew had exploited my condition for his gain. "I never expected him to act like this," he exclaimed, shocked by Andrew's actions. By then, however, I had come to terms with the end of our marriage and reassured my father that I wanted to stay with them for a while. My parents were supportive, encouraging me to do whatever made me happy, which, at that moment, meant being with family. Before moving back with my parents permanently, I decided to visit our old house, only to discover that the front door lock was broken. Confused, we rang the doorbell and were greeted by a stranger. He informed us that he had bought the house a few months earlier and was now living there with his family. Although my parents were outraged, I chose not to cause trouble for the new residents and left quietly. Unable to let the matter rest, I called Andrew to confront him about the house. He confirmed nonchalantly, "Yeah, I sold it while you were in the hospital, keeping the money as my compensation. It was my house originally." His response hit me like another blow, but by then, I had braced myself for his selfishness and focused on rebuilding my life without him. Andrew's indifferent tone as he mentioned the sale of our house left me deeply sighing. I had just learned that he had sold our home about a year ago. Around the same time his visits and concern for me began to wane. It was shocking to realize he had made such a significant decision without even discussing it, especially since we were still technically married and had yet to finalize the division of our assets. Although the divorce papers were signed, we had planned to meet the following week to settle these matters, but Andrew had preemptively acted on his own, which was astounding. When I confronted Andrew over the phone, trying to keep my composure, I said, "You didn't understand anything." His confused response was, "What do you mean?" I simply replied, "I'll explain next week," and hung up. Turning to my concerned parents, I managed a smile and asked my father for a favor. I laid out my plans and requested his assistance in preparing everything. I've already prepared all the necessary documents. There's not much time before our meeting next week, but we'll manage, my father assured me, his slightly worried smile revealing a mix of guilt for having introduced me to Andrew and anger towards him. His determination to support me was palpable, and I felt grateful for it. As the day of the meeting approached, I found myself unexpectedly smiling at the thought of how Andrew would react to the preparations we were making. We decided to hold the meeting at my parents' house. My parents and I sat on one side, facing Andrew across the table. Despite knowing how much pain the divorce had caused my parents, Andrew appeared utterly indifferent, even smirking at times. His demeanor was not only unapologetic but also disrespectful and arrogant, which only solidified my resolve. Seated beside my parents, I felt the weight of the injustice he had done to me, but I also felt empowered by the support of my family as we prepared to face him together. As the discussion unfolded, I maintained a calm demeanor, reassuring Andrew, "I don't plan to ask for too much." He attempted to appear generous, claiming that the money from selling the house would suffice. This statement visibly angered my father, but I gently touched his hand to soothe him, signaling that we had the upper hand in this discussion and there was no need for heightened emotions. "Before we proceed, there's something important we need to address," I said, and my father handed me a document. Holding it out for Andrew to see, I continued, "The house was indeed in your name, but the land it stands on belongs to my father, who holds the title." A slight frown crossed Andrew's face. "So what? The house was still mine. No one can complain. Do you think this gives you a way to get back at me?" He chuckled, dismissing the implications. "It's true you legally sold the house," I acknowledged, "but since the land is still owned by my father, this poses a significant issue for the family that purchased the house." I continued outlining the predicament. "You sold the house, yes, but as the landowner, my father could theoretically demand rent from the family currently living there. Wouldn't that cause them considerable trouble?" I paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. "We're not planning to take that step. However, we can't simply relinquish our rights to the land without compensation we intend to discuss." The family had the opportunity to purchase the land, I continued. "We won't force them out or charge monthly rent, but it could be problematic if they refuse to buy." I explained that my father had originally intended this land as a gift for us to build our life on, not to be sold off to strangers without consideration. If the family who bought the house decided against purchasing the land, they might even sue, misled into thinking they had full ownership of their new home. Imagine their frustration, believing they had bought their dream home only to discover unexpected expenses tied to the land's ownership. We promptly visited the family who had purchased the house to discuss these issues and find a fair resolution. This approach not only protected my family's interests but also showed consideration for the unwitting buyers, aiming to prevent further conflict and distress. When we laid out the situation to the new homeowners, they were understanding but firm. They recognized that any legal complications stemming from the sale would ultimately fall on the seller, Andrew. They even mentioned the possibility of suing him if we couldn't reach a satisfactory agreement. Watching Andrew's face turn pale, I could tell he grasped the gravity of what was at stake. He could face severe financial repercussions. In a shaky voice, he asked, "What should I do?" I responded with a slight smile. "The family could buy the land from us, which would resolve everything smoothly. However, you'll need to cover the cost. Once they own both the house and the land, all current issues will be settled." I continued outlining the complications. Since they were unaware of the land's full value when they purchased the house, they might demand compensation from him. That decision would ultimately be theirs to make. Also, the land is in a prime location, likely worth more than the house itself. Even if you sold all your assets, it might not cover the costs. Alternatively, You could choose to buy back the house and cover the cost of the land, along with a relocation fee for the family. This would return both the house and land to your possession, and you could attempt to resell them. However, after paying the relocation fee, any profit you make would likely be minimal. I paused, letting the weight of this information sink in before addressing another point. And regarding alimony, your actions have caused me considerable emotional distress. I intend to seek compensation for that, so keep that in mind. You've used me as a pawn for your career ambitions, and now that I see this clearly, I'm disgusted by everything you've done. I plan to pursue damages for the emotional distress it's caused me. While evidence may be limited and a victory uncertain, discussing this matter is crucial given your current predicament. My father, though retired, chimed in with a stern tone. I still have many connections from my career. I've been in touch with former colleagues who have shared your opinions and actions regarding my daughter. You're being looked down upon by everyone. Andrew. His cheerfully grim smile finally seemed to make Andrew realize the seriousness of his situation. The combined pressure of potential legal and financial consequences, coupled with the loss of his professional reputation, cornered Andrew and forced him to confront these harsh realities. The status he had built at work, using me as a stepping stone, was now crumbling around him. Sitting confidently across from Andrew, I clasped my hands together, my smile radiant and unlike any he had seen from me before, especially since our separation. Let's discuss what happens next, I began, my voice steady and assured. Caught up in the gravity of the situation, Andrew managed only a strained laugh, his eyes brimming with tears. As the negotiations unfolded, it became clear that the advantage was mine. Andrew agreed to pay alimony and compensate for the land where our house once stood. We later explained this arrangement to the family who had bought the house, ensuring they were treated fairly and understood the new terms. In the end, the results were favorable for everyone except Andrew, who found himself losing everything. The rumors my father had subtly spread throughout his company compounded his losses, eroding his status and halting any chances of promotion. As these rumors persisted, Andrew became increasingly isolated, ultimately resigning from the company, an outcome my father later shared with me. There's a temptation to view all of this as karma. The gains Andrew thought he had secured through exploitation proved to be ephemeral, crumbling under the weight of his actions. Now, back at my parents' home, I found solace and a new purpose in teaching sewing classes. While my classes are modestly attended by local women and children, the joy and fulfillment I derive from sharing my skills have brought me a profound sense of happiness. This unexpected turn in my life has shown me that even without having children of my own, a dream I once shared with Andrew, I can still impart my passion and experience in ways that enrich both my life and the lives of those around me. More than anything, this journey has taught me about the resilience of the human spirit and the unexpected paths to fulfillment.